Evening. My name's Ceri Thomas. I'm one of the editors at Tortoise, and thanks very much for joining us today. Tortoise has always been about two things, really: slow news, depth and seriousness, but also openness. And if you've been on these thinkings in the last day or two, you'll have heard my colleague James Harding say that the ones we've been doing this week have been an attempt really to test the limits of that principle of openness, because we're doing something in public here, which traditionally in a newsroom would have been the most private part of what we'd have done. So if back in my days at the BBC, we were embarking on a long reporting project like this, you wouldn't tell anybody about it. I mean, you wouldn't tell the people sitting next to you if you could help it. And sometimes that was a tiny bit necessary, but a lot of the time I think it was just quite good fun being a bit furtive. But we enjoyed it. So what we're doing this evening, which is opening up our reporting publicly on a piece of work we might not publish for weeks or even months, feels like quite a risk. There's a risk that someone might steal the idea. There's a risk that someone might tell you it's not a very good idea. But either way, I'm delighted to have your company to take that risk tonight. And the truth is, with something like QAnon, I don't think it's all that great a risk, because the fact is there's been quite a weight of reporting about QAnon, and some of it's been very good. I should say at the top that if you haven't come across any of that reporting, if you're not familiar with QAnon, don't worry. We're going to spend quite a chunk of this evening really trying to understand what this thing is, what this phenomenon is all about. For now, let me just say it's a sort of set of conspiracy theories, highly influential, I would say, and with some characteristics of a religious cult about it as well. It's a really interesting thing. The challenge for us, I think, is can we report it better than anybody else has as a small newsroom? And of course, the only way we can do that is if we're able to apply as much brain power as possible to the reporting. And the great news is this evening that the brains are yours. So we want most of all for you to join in. I think one of the things we've seen over the last few days as we've been doing these thinkings that have been looking forward to reporting that we're doing in the future is that you don't need to know chapter and verse about the thing that we're talking about in order to make a really sharp point about it. Actually, some of the best points have come from people who knew, who like the rest of us were listening and learning and finding out. So I hope you won't feel constrained by the knowledge you've brought in. What we're looking for from this is leads to follow, is angles to chase down. And they can come from anywhere in the room. The way to do it, you may know by now, is somewhere down the two ways. At the bottom of your screen there should be a button that says participants. If you click on that, it'll bring up a list on the right-hand side of your screen of people who are in this call. And underneath there's a tab that says raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, I'll see a sort of blue hand in the come up on my screen, and I'll be able to bring you directly into the conversation. And the other way is to join in the chat. My brilliant colleague Liz Mosley is moderating the chat. That's not, there she is. It's not a risk-free thing, chatting to Liz, because if you say something interesting, she might flag it to me, I might see it, and we'll pull you into the conversation. So either raise your hand, join the chat. Either way, do tell us what you think, what you know, and help us to understand this slightly weird and opaque world of QAnon. So let's get going on trying to understand what this is all about. And I think when you do something like this with a phenomenon like QAnon that's been around for a few years now, always worth asking, is there really still something interesting about this? I think there is. And I want to explain why by playing you a short clip, which I think Sam, who's helping with the technicals tonight, is going to help with. This is of a woman called Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Following 4chan, Q, any of that stuff. Anybody? I'm going to watch for your comments here. Okay, so we posted an article just a few days ago about who is Q. We posted that on American Truth Seekers. there has been a lot of chatter. I don't know how much you guys know about Q. It's an anonymous person. All right, so Q is a patriot. We know that for sure, but we do not know who Q is, okay? So now the question is, I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to tell you I don't know who Q is, but I'm just going to tell you about it because I think it's something worth listening to and paying attention to. Okay, and the reason why is because many of the things that he has given clues about and talked about on 4chan and other forums have really proven to be true.
I think, as we'll discover in the next little while, there's nothing particularly remarkable about the views of Marjorie Taylor Greene as a follower of QAnon. But what is remarkable is that she's going to Congress. That almost certainly, barring some huge unforeseen turn of events, she's going to be elected for to one of the seats in the northern part of Georgia in November this year. And she's probably the most outspoken adherent of QAnon who'll be going to Congress. But there have been calculations that several dozen officials who are standing for national election in the United States this year have spoken in favor of QAnon theories, have lined up alongside it, promoted them on their website, have supported it in a number of ways. And so it's an indication of the move from the margins to the mainstream of an ideology that really only came about 3 or 4 years ago. Let me first, if I may, then let's get going. I want to start, if I can, with Nikki Wolf. Nikki, who is going to be the reporter on with me on this story. Are you there, Nikki? Are you right? There
Hi.
he is.
Can you hear me okay?
Nikki. So Nikki wrote a piece for Tortoise last year about 8chan, has worked for The Guardian, for The New Statesman, terrific journalist who specialises in this particular area. Nikki, take us back to the start. Where did this all start?
Well, it depends on exactly what you mean by where it all started. I mean, ultimately, this kind of conspiracy theory goes back to something called Gamergate, which was sort of this flashpoint moment of digital radicalization. Gamergate started out as video game communities responding against what they saw as an invasion by women and people of color into what had been a very male, very kind of masculine, safe space, as it were. There's an awful lot of ironies that go around here about the fact that safe space is a concept used as a weapon, but ultimately that was the core thing. And Gamergate became sort of coalesced as this group of people who would harass female video games developers and female video games journalists online. Somewhere in the mid to late 2010s, early 2010s, they bounce around from a whole load of different sites, and there's a lot of term definition here. So they're going around these things called Chan sites, of which the most famous is 4chan. And what defines a Chan site is that every poster is anonymous and that each post is ephemeral, so it just disappears. So the way to show belonging on that kind of site is by developing a set of shibboleths. The behavior becomes very aggressive and offensive because that's the way of denoting the in crowd from the out crowd. Their behavior got aggressive to the level of, legal vulnerabilities for the site. They got kicked off of 4chan. They wound up on a site called 8chan, which was a similar kind of structure. And there they sort of festered. And that movement then fed both into what became kind of known as the alt-right, and it also fed into a kind of flourishing set of conspiracy worldviews. First were called PizzaGate. PizzaGate, people might remember as being, it was a conspiracy theory based around the idea that there was a paedophile ring being run out of the basement of a pizza restaurant in DC, that somebody at some point who'd been convinced by this ideology had turned up with a gun to try and investigate. It's a miracle no one was hurt. And then that ideology kind of evolved more and sort of snowballed and snowballed until now QAnon is this all-encompassing conspiracy theory worldview that fundamentally holds that Donald Trump is a secret genius who is fighting against a deep state conspiracy of pedophiles. And I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of different angles and different kind of elements to this. But there's also a personality at the heart of it, which is this guy called, or person, mysterious figure called Q, who started posting as Q refers to his level of security clearance. Q level clearance is like top secret clearance. And he started posting as if there was about to be, I think his first post was Hillary Clinton extradition order accepted. And it just started this, people started getting it, and they call themselves bakers, because what they're doing is following bread, and I'm doing air quotes an awful lot, but they follow the breadcrumbs that Q leaves, and Q leaves these cryptic kind of questioning posts like, what has George Soros been up to, and all these kind of things that feed in. And obviously conspiracy theories kind of in the internet conglomerate together, and this is the kind of agglomeration of all of them. It's sort of the ultimate mega conspiracy theory. But at the heart of it is this poster or several posters called Q, who are leaving these cryptic clues.
All right, Nikki, that's great. I'll come back to you in a second, but I think I've got a little way to go before I feel like I've really got my head around this. So I'm going to pull in Aoife Gallagher, if I may, Eva, if you're out there. Eva's from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and she's a specialist in conspiracy theories and networks of this kind and disinformation, and done a bit of work around QAnon. Eva, can I ask you a kind of deceptively simple but actually really difficult question? What is QAnon?
Such a question. God, you start with a hard one. So, I mean, Nikki's explanation there was absolutely fantastic. I don't think I could have done much better myself. So QAnon at this stage is pretty much a meta conspiracy. So it kind of brings in conspiracies that have been around for decades, like things to do with JFK's death and, you know, different kind of, you know, and things that are, you know, in a lot of respects true, like around media ownership and things that people have been kind of, you know, almost like worried about for a long time, that, you know, media is owned by a very small group of people. And then it kind of brings in these new age conspiracies. It brings in like conspiracies to do with 5G, which has obviously been a massive thing in the time of the coronavirus, and of course vaccines as well. You know, so they're all kind of, as I say, there's many different strands to QAnon, and it all kind of, you know, coalesces into this one kind of massive conspiracy that is, you know, the thing is that it is kind of, you know, at its core, it's US focused, and Donald Trump is at the center of it. But what we're seeing, you know, especially I'd say this year, is that, you know, it's not just, you know, confined to the States. It doesn't just draw in people that are Trump supporters in the States. It brings in people from all over the world. And it's, you know, it's the narratives have kind of changed as they've gone to different countries as well. So to me, QAnon is ever evolving. I don't think it's going to, you know, it's easy to kind of define it as, you know, the theory that Trump is going to be the savior, and he's going to, you know, lock up all this elite group of pedophilic, you know, child traffickers. But it keeps evolving from that. So I think that there's kind of, you know, a new generation that's almost coming into this now, that's that, you know, they might not necessarily be Trump supporters, but they just are maybe completely disillusioned with politics and disillusioned with, you know, the way society is going and things like that. And it really feeds into to that kind of train of thought.
So it's got some elements to it that are quite familiar. It's a weird mix of old and new, isn't it? Because there's anti-Semitism in there, so they're obsessed with George Soros. There's they're obsessed with people like Bill Gates. There are things that we're familiar with in this country, this obsession with satanic abuse and child abuse and those things, which, as Nikki said, led to this weird PizzaGate scene in a Washington pizzeria. But are there new bits as well?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of Satanist pedophile narrative seems to be the one that kind of keeps on going. So like I put myself through the task of watching like a new documentary that's kind of come out in the past couple of months called Out of the Shadows. So this is kind of, it seems to be the one that is getting a lot of young people into PizzaGate especially. And it doesn't actually mention QAnon. So it doesn't, you know, mention anything to do with Q drops or anything like that. But it's the same kind of narrative that it's pushing. So, you know, saying that Hollywood is just like a massive pedophile ring, and that there are, you know, Satanist child rituals going on all over the world, and that they're all linked together. So like what I found from watching that was that, you know, it's the same kind of thing. It deals in things like coincidences. So it, you know, it doesn't state facts. It states something along the lines of, you know, actually, well, this is another video that I was watching the other day, you know, to do with Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is a big kind of, you know, player in QAnon as well. And, you know, Tom Hanks has this thing where he posts on Instagram, and he posts about, like, you know, lost like things that people have lost in the street. So like maybe a picture of, you know, a shoe or a glove or something like that. And he posted, you know, a photo of a glove that was found in the street. And, you know, beside the glove, there was, you know, kind of writing that you'd find that, like, you know, the council might write on a road if they're, you know, doing some kind of work on it. And they took this code and they put it into, you know, a certain search engine. And what came up when you go into the images is images of, you know, teenagers in, you know, dressed in kind of not even, you know, anything super provocative, but I mean, just, you know, the fact that this code that was on Tom Hanks' picture is, you know, so it's kind of that, you know, they don't deal in facts. That's the thing. They deal in coincidences, and the fact that, you know, how many, that's the whole thing, is how many coincidences until, you know, you really waking up to what's actually happening.
But it seems to me it's completely inconceivable without the internet, isn't it? Because I think one of the smart things about it is its posture seems to be to say to people, go off and find out for yourself. Don't believe anything. Go off and find out for yourself. And if you say that to people who are interested in QAnon, then they're probably going to go down certain rabbit holes and find certain things, aren't they? And they're going to believe that they've exercised some agency and they found out the truth. And you know, that seems to be like an important way that they operate.
Yeah, definitely. And again, with that Out of the Shadows documentary as well, they don't really say anything concrete, but they urge people to go and do their own research. And, you know, when they look into things like, you know, these kind of old, you know, CIA like operations that took place in the 60s and 70s and things like that, and people will look them up, and they are real and they did happen. But it's the conclusions that they draw to from those things actually happening. And, you know, I think another massive thing that like has become, you know, it's such a driving force as to why it's becoming so popular now is coronavirus, and the fact that, you know, the world is kind of going through this very strange phase that none of us have ever gone through, where we're kind of questioning, you know, why our lives have all been turned upside down. And we're also thinking, you know, it's kind of it's a brilliant breeding ground for conspiracies, because the narrative that was kind of pushed by most governments was kind of, you know, the same thing. It was social distancing, it was lockdowns, it was washing your hands, it's, you know, face masks. And, you know, so the fact that there's kind of this narrative, you know, that's kind of been pushed by one agency, the World Health Organization, you know, it's just a breeding ground for it. And people want to think that there is a reason why all these things are going on in the world. And it's a lot easier to kind of point towards a small group of people and say that they are responsible for all these things, instead of, you know, the reality that is, you know, that you know, there's just a lot of really bad people in the world, and it's not just a small group of people.
I think we've got Miro Dittrich on the call as well. Miro works for the Amadeo Antonio Foundation in Berlin. Because I just want to pick up on something that Evie was saying there, which is that, or Nikki too was saying, this is a phenomenon that was very much US focused. But hey Miro, good to see you.
Hi.
Looking at this from Berlin, have you seen QAnon gaining strength, gaining credence in Germany particularly?
I've been following QAnon in the US since the beginning, since 2017 when it started. And there were some people in Germany who posted about it, but it was very rarely. During the Yellow Vest protest in France that also swept to Germany, some people started flirting with QAnon, but nothing really happened. What we have seen is that during the coronavirus, especially about mid-March, QAnon exploded in Germany. Channels on Telegram used to have 20,000 max people following them, and within 2 weeks they were at 40,000, 80,000, and now over 120,000 people following them. So it's been a huge explosion, and not only of some channels, but on a broad scheme. It's Twitter, it's YouTube, it's on all platforms, it's on Facebook, and it's really extreme. They're really religious obsessed. So yeah, in Germany, we definitely see a huge spike. I think Germany is right now the biggest QAnon following group outside of the US.
And so Eva was explaining that, you know, that for people who fear that there might be a kind of world government, this has been a moment when it perhaps looks as if that fear has been, you know, has been given some credibility because the world has reacted in similar ways to the virus. Do you think that's what's been driving interest in Germany, or is it something else going on?
It definitely plays a part, but I don't think it's the main reason. I think most of all, if we look at crisis moments, it's usual that conspiracy theories flourish. And the problem that we as a society don't take these wacky sounding conspiracy theories in calm times leads to an explosion in this crisis moment. People definitely had a feel of lose of control, and I think a lot of people can't handle this. And especially we see that most people who believe in conspiracy theories are the last people to believe in an ordered world. Everything is planned, everything makes sense. And to see such a chaotic event, random mutation in a virus take over the world, and it's not orchestrated by someone, it's hard for them to live in such a chaotic world. So they rather find an enemy. And I think in Germany, we have especially an explosion like this because we didn't have much cases. It wasn't that bad like in France or in Italy or Spain, and there were a lot of deaths. You really could see the effect. Here, most people didn't know anyone who had corona, but people felt the restrictions. So it was hard to abstract for them to have an invisible enemy and concrete restrictions of their life. And in Germany, we have also a speciality. We have, I think they're all over the world, sovereign citizens, people who don't believe the state is real that they live in. They're definitely the US. But in Germany, it's called Reichsbewegung, and they're pretty popular here, and they're quite violent. And a lot of these narratives that are in the QAnon movement fit quite well into the Reichsbürger movement. And if we see the memes they're using, the concepts they're talking about, there's a huge overlap. For example, most European countries believe in QAnon because they think Trump will save them. And in QAnon in Germany, there's a lot of stories about US troops being 200,000 in Germany ready to take over and free Germany. And Trump recently decided to pull the troops out of Germany, but facts never matter in this world. So I think the speciality of these Reichsbürger helped a lot to spread in Germany.
Yeah, and Mira, I tried to make the case early on that we perhaps should take QAnon seriously because we're seeing it starting to move into the sort of political mainstream. So there'll be, you know, at least one sort of firm believer in Congress after the autumn, and there'll, you know, arguably a number of others. Are you convinced that we should take it seriously? Because the beliefs are tricky to take seriously.
Yeah, I think it's really important to take them seriously. In Germany, we don't see a big political party structure around them forming. But as we've seen in the US, there are quite a lot of violent acts that have been perpetrated. There were several killings. There were someone was convicted of a terrorist act, and people were kidnapped, and people tried to kill Joe Biden. And I think there's a huge violence baked into this idea. Because these people live in a collective delusion, and they're quite obsessed with this delusion. And in this delusion, there's an epic fight of good versus evil. And good is the savior Trump, and evil are these evil Satanist, child-sacrificing madmen. And Q himself posts about this fight for the death. So if you prime people on there will be this great transformation and all the evil people will be gone, but it's an imaginary event that will never happen. And on the other side is this doom of the world. And if you program people to believe in this worldview, but the salvation can't be happening because it's imaginary, people start to take it in their own hand. And I think if Trump were to lose in November, we would see quite a lot of violence because people think the deep state would be winning and they have to enact the violence. Yeah. And it's really hard to see the loss of reality these people portray. For example, in Germany, someone cut down a 5G tower and filmed himself and put it up on Facebook with his real name. And obviously he got arrested and had to pay 30,000 euros. But he was so convinced of these evil things that are happening that he had no feeling of doing something illegal. I mean, he could have worn a mask or uploaded it somewhere anonymous, but he's so lost in his crazy world that he can't make rational decisions. And I think that's really dangerous.
Okay. I can see Andrew Sebke in the chat making the point that how do we deal with this? I'm just worrying a little bit out loud that we might make it worse by talking about it. I might come to you, Andrew, at some point just to raise that. But before I do, Josef Honberg is on the call as well, who's doing a master's at the University of Hamburg and specialising in this kind of area. Josef, where are people finding Q and QAnon? Where are they coming across this all this stuff?
I can mainly speak for Germany, and I would say the main starting point isn't 4chan, the direct source, or in the meanwhile 8chan, where Q is directly posting, but it's social media sites, it's YouTube, a lot of videos as previously mentioned, for example, Out of the Dark, Out of the Shadows is on YouTube, has a lot of views. This is one of the first connecting points to it. And then it's leading to other websites, messenger services as Telegram. We saw that Telegram is one of the main recruiting tools in Germany for QAnon believers, because on Telegram, they are kind of sure that they won't be deleted, that there won't be any form of censorship, as they call it. And this is the place where they radicalize themselves, because they can't find any counter speech. They're just applauding each other and radicalizing each other by proving their views and worldviews. And we saw that happening, as Miro mentioned, especially in the beginning of March, midst of March, when these groups exploded in Germany and channels promoting Q and Q messages got over 120,000 subscribers, and there are a lot of them. So not only one big channel.
Yeah, and tell me, have you been surprised to see this take off in the way that it has in Germany? Because there are some of the characteristics that do feel particularly American. I'm going to ask. I'll come back to Eva in a second and just talk about the overlap with the sort of evangelical Christians, which is, you know, a particularly strong strand in America. The obsession with Donald Trump again feels much more likely to pull people in America than in Hamburg. Have you been surprised by how much purchase this has got in Germany?
Not really surprised on the whole thing, because as we mentioned a lot of times now, QAnon is a meta conspiracy. So it kind of catches a lot of conspiracies. It can integrate a lot of narratives into itself. And this is what happened in Germany, as Miro already phrased out, with the Reichsbürgerbewegung, with the sovereign citizen movement. And what surprised me in Germany is that this narrative, the Reichsbürgerbewegung, isn't that big. I would guess it's about 30,000 people in the Reichsbürgerbewegung. But this narrative that they included into QAnon exploded to now 120,000 people, maybe more. This is what surprised me, that they kind of integrated a lot of conspiracy theories and got a melting pot of conspiracy theories. And even if a lot of their predictions didn't came true, for example, they had the prediction that as also Mira mentioned, the Defender 2020 NATO mission will be a mission by Trump to liberate Germany and Europe from the deep state. Well, it didn't came true. The Defender mission was aborted. It's now a much smaller case. And also troops of the US are pulled out of Germany. It wasn't a pullback from the QAnon movement. There are still a lot of people believing into Q, even though the predictions never really worked. That was the surprising thing. And that is also the thing where I don't know what to do. Even if the predictions are wrong, the people, the believers, the bakers don't care.
Yeah, okay. Eva, just talk us through how important a sort of transmission mechanism or an accelerant, the relationship between QAnon and sort of evangelical Christian groups has been in the States.
Yeah, I mean, religion forms a massive part of this, the kind of the real basis of it. And I mean, like, even coming from Ireland, that is a very Catholic country, you know, I just don't think that we have that here. There's a very, like, it's almost a fear of like anti-Christian sentiment in the States. And what QAnon presents is Satanism, which is just, it's the devil, you know? So I mean, that those kind of fears really still hold true with a lot of, you know, fundamental Christian kind of types in the States. So I think that, you know, the religion part of it is, I mean, it's, you know, it's a part that kind of, you know, I mean, it confuses me just because, in my opinion, like, I kind of think of QAnon as a religion. So, you know, it's kind of strange to know that, you know, that, I don't know, it's just the sense of belief that people have that there is so much evil going on in the world, and it's all kind of traced back to this kind of pedophilic cult. So I do think that the, you know, the Christianity part of it is huge. It really, really is. Yeah.
And I want to come to Andrew Girdwood in a section in a minute, because Andrew, you're saying in the chat that we're going to need a technological solution to some of this misinformation. So let me just see if we can line you up, Andrew. But while we're getting Andrew lined up, Eva, can you just talk us through again the role that Donald Trump plays in the sort of imagination and the way that people think of Q and QAnon?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Trump is the savior in QAnon, and he is the person who is lined up to pretty much save the world from this elite group of pedophiles. So, like, he is the central player in it all. We've seen from, you know, some analysis that we've conducted at ISD that, you know, Trump has amplified QAnon accounts on Twitter multiple times. He has alluded to the conspiracy, even more than alluded to it. You know, he's really, really kind of amplified it quite a few times. And you see that, you know, at the times that he is tweeting about it or kind of alludes to it, that the conversation volume just absolutely, it increases every single time. So his kind of role in it has changed, I suppose, over the years. Like, at the start, he didn't really have, you know, like a role in the actual conversation that was going on online, but as time has gone on, he's really inserted himself into the conversation. And even you see, like, people around him at this stage. I mean, a couple of months ago, you know, Ivanka Trump and Elon Musk were having a conversation about red pilling on Twitter, which, like, when you go back, like, when I think back like 2 years ago, something like that would have just been so outstandingly crazy. But yet here we are in 2020, and that is actually a normal part of you know, you're scrolling through Twitter and you're kind of like, fine, that's what's happening today. But so, and, you know, and then actually just going back to even a couple of weekends ago when General Michael Flynn took the QAnon oath and posted it on Twitter, like a video of himself and his friends on the 4th of July. So, like, these, you know, Trump has, he's such a, like, he is the player in QAnon, and he is the person who is really, and I can see that he is really starting to realize that he can control this narrative so much. He has a lot of power in this.
It's true. I mean, even the colour of the ties he's wearing is analysed for its significance, isn't it? So there's meaning attributed to every single thing that he does.
Yeah, every single thing, even the spelling mistakes in his tweets.
Let's just turn our attention to the question that Andrew Girdwood raised in the chat, which is how do we think about corralling or patrolling this? Are you there, Andrew?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, good. Thanks for joining in. You were suggesting that we need, if we're going to think about ways to keep on top of this, that we might need some sort of technical solutions. It's interesting, isn't it? The FBI declared QAnon and domestic terror threats in the United States last year. So, they're on the radar of the authorities. I think Reddit have done something about them. YouTube have not. But talk us through what you know about the sort of technical response there's been and what you think ought to be happening, I suppose.
It's a controversial subject because we frequently have thinkings about the powers of the social media platforms and their ability to regulate and control the truth. So you saw what happened when Twitter began to mark some of Trump's tweets as incorrect. However, given the scale of this and given the importance of this, and given that there are people who can't take the initiative to research what they've read, you just take the news off memes and things, I'm seeing, and I believe that technological solution is possible. So there are players, for example, third parties, who will flag the credibility of news sources when you're still in Facebook or Twitter or still in Google News. I use one and I find it very helpful. Just a little red flag. I'm not even going to click on that link. But I appreciate it is controversial. And then we're into the business of who appoints these regulators as a truth? Who are they to decide what's right and what's wrong? And then just lastly, because it seems relevant and interesting, one of the reasons why TikTok is being used to sort of rally against Trump is it's video based and it's loaded with sarcasm, and that makes it really hard for the FBI's Carnivore program and other technologies to understand what's actually being said in those messages. So I think technology is both the solution but the enemy.
Well, conversely, I think QAnon didn't play particularly on TikTok in the early days, but you're starting to see it there now as well. So it's both the resistance but also the promotion, isn't it, Andrew?
Yes, the platforms, I believe, are just the communities. So I don't think the platforms sow the seeds, they just amplify the effect.
Yeah, okay. I want to come to Daniel Mackey, who's saying some interesting things in the chat about the way that Donald Trump is playing this. But before I do that, Nikki Wolf, if you're still there, can I just come back to you, because one of the strands of chat again has been that people have been pointing towards Jeffrey Epstein and his little black book that surfaced a while ago, containing all kinds of sort of well-known prominent names, as something that obviously lends credence to and helps support this kind of worldview. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and I think what's the uncomfortable problem with all of this is that the way a conspiracy grows is that often it's built around like a pearl around a kind of a grain of truth, right? The uncomfortable truth is that what we've learned from the Jeffrey Epstein thing is that there was a powerful paedophile ring among the powerful. That there's not absolutely nothing to these things, and I think a lot of the time, and when we were talking a little bit about possible solutions, and a lot of the time these are people who just get laughed at out of hand and dismissed out of hand, and that pushes them further towards radicalization. And I think what we have to accept is that a lot of the time people come to a conspiracy theory like this because they're feeling a very real structural power inadequacy, and the idea that a cabal of people run the world. A lot of these things in the conspiracy theory are very silly, but if you are a powerless person on the internet who the feeling of powerlessness you have can often be very real, and that's what is part of the kind of structural thing that drives people towards this a lot of the time. And when they get laughed at, it drives them further into the ideology. And I think we have to be in finding solutions. We have to treat these people like people to a certain extent. They're not. If we treat it as a kind of madness, we're not addressing the structural problems behind it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we'll have to take account of in the way that you report this is that it's a very forgiving set of theories, isn't it? We can't sort of play gotcha with it. People don't seem to mind if a prediction is made that doesn't turn out to be true, that the thing just adapts and swallows up those inconsistencies and moves on. That makes it extremely hard to pin down, doesn't it, Nikki?
Yeah, and because the other structural thing that the internet has really changed is that it has flattened the distribution network. Conspiracy theories always used to exist, but and Hannah Arendt writes a lot about this in Origins of Totalitarianism, where she talks about the kind of anti-Semitism myth and how that got distributed. But fundamentally, during the kind of early 20th century and late 19th, the distribution networks were limited by publishing and then broadcasting. Now you have a situation where anyone can publish, and information flows across essentially a completely flat network. And that means that this just becomes a ginormous petri dish for this kind of thing to grow. It's a complete paradigm shift in the communication infrastructure itself. And I think this is one of the best ways of thinking about something like QAnon is as an emergent factor, an emergent kind of property of that infrastructure change.
Yeah. Daniel Mackie, are you out there somewhere? You've been making some interesting points in the chat. I think you work at the ISD with Eva, so we'll double up on the ISD for a minute.
I am.
Just back to Donald Trump, which is one of you can meet again. Just to go back to Donald Trump, I was interested in what you were saying about Trump, because you can look at Trump and think that he literally can't put on a yellow tie without a bunch of QAnon people say it's yellow. That's the, I think it was that's the color of the flag that a ship.
Yeah, the level of analysis.
So you can't even wear a yellow tie without people over-interpreting that madly. So what do you think the balance is between what's being over-interpreted and what he's doing deliberately in this realm?
I think that at this point there is at least a constituent group within his administration who are aware of the influence and reach of the Q followership, and so there is a certain level of intent in some of the stuff that gets posted. I don't know if that, as Aoife was saying earlier, I don't know if that was necessarily the case at the beginning. The hero worship thing is really interesting to me. I think it is. I think it's grounded in the Trump as outsider narrative that he really quite effectively cast for himself during the 2016 election, which is that he was this Washington outsider and that he was going to come in and drain the swamp, quote unquote. You know, the reality being, of course, that he is in fact a card-carrying member of the very same elite that many of these folks have issue with. But the other piece of it that I wanted to highlight was the commercialization of Q. So at this point in time, the followership has reached such a mass that in the course of our research, we're seeing that there are individuals who are representing themselves as affiliated with Q or associated with the movement who are making tons of money off of this, selling merch, selling everything from bags and shirts and pins to tickets to events. It's become a whole cottage industry. And there are different aspects of the Q identity that industry takes on in order to further their cred. So one being affiliation with the military or the intelligence community as this sort of rogue but noble actor. Like I've been doing a lot of work looking at a couple of key Q accounts on social media that are, by all accounts, making, it has to be millions of dollars off of the stuff that they're selling to people who are just looking for answers to like a world just defined by chaos right now.
And you're seeing that that monetization becoming an increasing.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, and the way that social media, enables that sort of commercialization just so fluidly. These people have taken on a kind of influencer role, but at least for me, the terrifying component of that, of course, is that this has a real world impact, right? It's so deeply rooted in racist, homophobic, deeply problematic ideologies. It's a subset of the far right movement more generally online, and there's a group of people making money off of it, or individuals who are making money off of it.
Yeah, and is this to you the most troubling manifestation of that far right conspiracy theory driven stuff at the moment? This is where the sort of worst of the action is.
That it scares me the most, for sure, because once there's money behind it, you don't really know where it's going to go, right?
Yeah.
It's not the intent necessarily of the person selling the the QAnon handbag to necessarily result in, you know, a mass shooting or whatever, but we see that this is happening. Like one of the things I raised in the chat is just a couple weeks ago here in Canada, there was a military reservist who tried to attack the Prime Minister's residence. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but you know, if you were to go to his social media accounts before they were taken down, he was a card-carrying follower of Q. He had been consuming this garbage, and it led him to go and try to commit an act of you know, political terrorism. Okay,
so that's interesting. So I think so when Nikki wrote the piece about 8chan for us last year, which was off the back of a couple of, you know, violent, horrible attacks where the shooter had posted his intent on 8chan before going and committing the act. To an extent, you had to go and look for those theories in places where people didn't normally go on the internet, 8chan, 4chan, 8kun and afterwards. Is one of the things that we should worry about, Daniel, that those things are now coming to you, whereas before you had to
Yes. So I the other half of my life, I work as an investigator. So I investigate different issues, misconduct, financial crime, terrorism, whatever. And in 3 of the 7 investigations I've worked on since January, subjects of interest in those investigations have been posting Q-related stuff. I saw it yesterday on a fraud investigation I've been working on. It's unbelievable. And the nexus to military enlistment is particularly concerning. You have folks who have access to weaponry and training and a belief system that they've already kind of been indoctrinated with. It's quite concerning.
Yeah. Okay. Can I come back to you, Miro? Because I started with an impossible question to Eva. I want to put an impossible question to you, if I may. Who is Q?
I think that's really complicated because I don't think it's the same answer all the time. We've seen that in the beginning, the style changed, they kind of adopted. I think in the beginning it probably was a group of people. Then there was a really long time where there was a break because the page he was posting on 8chan was taken down because 3 mass shooters posted their manifestos on the page. And then he came back on 8kun. And I think his style changed again. And it's not that refined as it used to be. And if you look at the people who are behind the new page, 8kun, who also did 8chan, they have a financial interest in having this Q thing around because their main business model, far-right extremism, kind of, because there was such a long break, kind of went off to Telegram and other places. But Q said he will only post on 8chan. So they have a real interest to keep this whole thing going. And if you see him, he's a public believer in QAnon. And when he testified before Congress, he had a Q pin, and he's signaling a lot. Also, the original founder of 8chan, who now fights these people because he sees what's been happening with 8chan, clearly suspects these 2 people running the Q account now. Because in the way the verification of who Q is handled, and there would be no way from the outside to see if from the change from 8chan to 8kun, it's actually the same person or group that's still posting there. And he also has some concrete proofs more on how Q talks about code in a similar way one of the programmers of 8kun did. So I don't think Q needed to be the same person. I think there was this huge break and his style changed a lot. So I don't think there's like this one answer. Okay. But that's also so interesting to have this anonymous person as a prophet of truth whose posts are being interpreted religiously and with absolutely no thought into the idea if it's still the same person as in the beginning.
Yeah, but tell me, at a technical level, I don't understand this very well, but I've read things that have suggested that Q has the real Q, if there is one, has a kind of an identifier called a trip code, which she has carried with him or her from one platform to the next, and that it's therefore possible to know that there is some consistency. Is that true, or is that overdone, that argument?
The way I understand the original founder of HN is it's in a way that the new 8kun site, the owner could do whatever they want. They just can act in a way that it's still the same code.
Okay.
So it's also one of the interesting things that when Q would be such a high-level military expert, there are way better ways to prove who you are, to carry identification with you. If you would had knowledge, like someone with this Q clearance would have, he would do it in a way more interesting and way more reliable way than this crappy way that's happening right now. That's absolutely from the outside not provable.
Yeah. Eva, let me come back to you, because it's tempting to think that if the FBI has declared QAnon a domestic terror threat, that they might at least have tried to find out who Q is. Do you think someone knows the identify some of these people or this person?
Yeah, I mean, someone knows who Q is, definitely. And at this stage, I mean, I do wonder, like, if they realized what they were creating. Do you know what I mean? Because they're, when you look on 4chan and 8chan, these kind of things are posted all the time. Like, people, say that they're people that they're not all the time and make outrageous claims. And it's kind of just like, they might have just got lucky and that one that stuck that day, and that's kind of, and they had to go along with it. So, like I'd agree, like there's so many different theories as to who Q is and if it's changed over time. And I would say at this stage, I mean, there's definitely, like, yeah, it's so hard to know, really, isn't it? Like, there has to be, there has to be someone out there who knows what Q is about, and is like, there has to be someone pulling strings at this stage from, I think, a little bit higher up. Now, that's just my opinion, but I do think that they have created such a community, not even a community, it's a digital cult. And because they're such dogmatic supporters of Donald Trump, that there has to be someone out there that's taking advantage of that at this stage.
Yeah, and it's interesting, it does have some of the characteristics of a religious cult. So you see people trying to de-radicalize or pull family members out, don't you? You see these things that we've associated with Scientology and those kind of religious cults in the past.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of something that I'm kind of getting very interested in now. And I'm planning a little experiment. I'm going to get my girlfriend to watch a QAnon documentary and see what pulls her in on it, because she wouldn't be like in the media sphere that much, or like, just kind of like a regular run-of-the-mill person. And I'm just really interested to see what really gets people like to that point that they just start to completely question everything around them. And it seems like, it's easy to look around the world and think that the place is awful and that there's no solution to it. But to be on that side of it, where you just can't believe absolutely anything that you're seeing anymore, it just doesn't sound like a very nice existence.
No, it sounds really hard work, doesn't it? Joseph, if you're still there, can I come back to you for a second? Because I'm just intrigued. We want to get out of this conversation leads to follow, things to follow, reporting angles to concentrate on. You're there doing your masters in Hamburg about all this. If you were us, what would you be trying to tuck into about QAnon at the moment?
Just a few answers to the further question about Q is Q. Those who is running 8kun is currently Jim Watkins, and there is no possibility to transfer the trip code from 8chan to 8kun. So at least Jim Watkins must know who Q is. And I just wanted to add this beforehand. The other thing to add, I would strengthen the point that Miro said, take it seriously in that kind of a sense, that take it seriously as a threat. I think if you are in a mindset where you are fighting for the undoubtable good against the extremely evil who is not shying away from drinking child's blood, if we're rephrasing the conspiracy about adrenochrome, for example, then you are also willing to use extreme force. We saw this a lot of times, and I think this is dangerous and should be regarded as a threat if you see some people following this cult. I do think that there has to be much more monitoring going on about current narratives of QAnon. And I do think that also YouTube and other social media sites have to implement better technical solutions. If we are looking at YouTube, for example, they kind of integrated into the search algorithm that conspiracy theories in the times of Corona will be shown less popular as they usually are. So if you're searching for QAnon, you won't find the primary source, or you won't find the QAnon documentaries created by QAnon believers. But we did saw that this doesn't really matter for a lot of people, as they are on message services as Telegram or WhatsApp. They are sending stuff directly. So they're not even searching for it, but they're getting content on QAnon from family members, from friends. And I think there has to be also technical implementation or even deplatforming by social media sites as YouTube. There also has to be deletions of videos because I think it's a major threat.
Okay. Daniel Mackey, if you're still there, can I just pop back to you for a second? Because you are obviously looking at this, deeply troubled by what you see. Again, if you were us trying to work out how to report this out, is it the tenacity of this? Is it the potential of it? Is it the spread? Is it the way that established politicians are getting on board? What is it what's the sort of source of your trouble at the moment?
The thing that's troubling me the most right now is actually, well, certainly the spread of it. I mean, I'm relatively new to studying Q as a subcomponent of the far right ecosystem. And the spread of it is very concerning for me. I have not seen something grow legs this quickly. The other piece of it though is, we do a lot of work studying foreign interference, coordinated inauthentic behavior on social media, and Q being this growing subcomponent of that far right ecosystem is just a low-hanging fruit for foreign state interference. So if we are to reflect upon the disaster that was the 2016 election, insofar as how social media companies handled it, QAnon for me is an easy play. If I'm Russia, if I'm China, if I'm Iran, if I'm any number of other foreign state actors or even non-state actors. So in addition to the commercialization piece of it, there's also a group of people who are looking to just sow discord in these spaces. I think that narrative has a lot of weight to it in 2020, just given what we went through 4 years ago. I would say that it's that, and the spread of it. The spread of it is really concerning. It's like a cancer.
Yeah, and as we've discussed, the kind of the flexibility, the endless adaptability.
Yeah. It's so applicable. You can take and apply it to anything. I mean, if you can sit there and analyze for pages and pages and pages the color of Donald Trump's tie, you can turn that narrative into whatever you want it to be. I mean, there was a question in the chat earlier about how the Q followers could take on this religiosity, of a particular Catholic bent when the Catholic Church has had their own scandals, and that to me just communicates the flexibility of this conspiracy theory. It's what makes it so insidious.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, Daniel, Eva, Nero, Nikki, Joseph, thanks all so much, and everyone else who's chipped in. I think astonishingly we're out of time already. Normally at the end of the thinking, we might try and sum up and say what we're going to do with this, but with these particular ones where we're just about to embark on a lengthy piece of reporting, I think we won't try to do that. I think you've given us a phenomenal amount of leads and ambitions that we want to chase down. This does look like a phenomenon that I certainly haven't seen anything similar to before. The speed of growth, as Daniel was saying, as everybody has referred to, this is less than 3 years old, this whole thing, and it's already going to be in represented in Congress in some respects later this year. We can see that it has real world effects. Both QAnon adherents threaten to blow themselves up on bridges over the Hoover Dam, the kind of thing that Daniel was saying he's seen in Canada this week. So I think it's right that we do take it seriously. But then the final point that Daniel and I were talking about there, the danger of this thing that's so nebulous, so adaptable, so deliberately interpreted by people to mean what they wanted to mean, means that it's incredibly hard to legislate for. But I think everybody's pointed us to the social media platforms as being, I'm really intrigued by this move from sort of dark corners of the web, 4chan and 8chan, to this stuff now being everywhere across mainstream social media. So the video that Eva talked about early on, Eva, what's it called? Remind me, the one that's got all the views recently.
Out of the Shadows.
I mean, the tens and tens of millions of views of that single video. So this, I think, is a proper phenomenon of scale now, and I think you've given us some incredibly useful leads to start working it. So thank you all. Thanks again to all our guests. Thanks to everybody on the call, and we will see you tomorrow evening.